Eleanor Hartwell stood on the wooden platform in the center of town, her heart beating so fast she thought everyone could hear it. The morning sun was bright, but she felt cold all over. Her blue dress, once beautiful and expensive, was now torn at the bottom and stained with mud from her desperate run through the streets. Just hours before, she looked out at the crowd of people who had gathered to watch. Some she recognized from church, others from the market where she used to shop with her mother years ago. But now they all stared at her like she was some strange animal in a cage. Their whispers filled the air around her. "That's the Hartwell girl," said one woman to another. "Can you believe what her father did?" "Lost everything gambling, I heard," replied her friend, shaking her head. "Poor thing has nothing left." Eleanor tried to stand straight and keep her head up, even though she wanted to disappear. Just 3 months ago, she had been living in comfort in her family's big house on Elm Street. She had servants, beautiful clothes, and plans to marry the banker's son. Life had been good, or so she thought, then everything fell apart in one terrible week. Her father, Robert Hartwell, had always been a proud man. He owned several shops in town and was known as a successful businessman. What Eleanor didn't know was that he had been borrowing money for years to keep up appearances. He owed money to banks, to business partners, and worst of all, to dangerous men who ran illegal gambling houses in the next town over. When the gambling debts came due, her father couldn't pay. The men came to their house one night demanding their money. Eleanor still remembered hiding in her room, listening to her father's desperate voice as he begged for more time. But there was no more time. 3 days later, her father was found dead by the river. The doctor said his heart had given out from the stress, but Eleanor knew better. The shame and fear had killed him just as surely as any disease. With her father gone, the creditors came like wolves. They took the house, the furniture, the shops, even her mother's jewelry that Eleanor had treasured since her mother died when she was 16. Everything was sold to pay the debts, but it still wasn't enough. That's how she ended up here. On this auction block, about to be sold like a piece of property, the auctioneer, a thin man with a loud voice, banged his hammer on the wooden post beside her. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called out, "we have here Miss Eleanor Hartwell, age 23, educated and well-mannered. She needs to work off the remaining debt of £500. £500. It might as well have been 5,000. Eleanor knew that amount would take her years to earn if she ever could earn it at all. "She can read and write," the auctioneer continued, "and has been raised as a proper lady. She would make a fine governess or companion for any respectable family." But Eleanor could see in the faces around her that no respectable family wanted anything to do with her. Her father's scandal had touched her too. In this small town, the sins of the father definitely fell on the daughter. A few men near the front of the crowd were looking at her with interest, but not the kind that made her feel safe. One was Mr. Briggs, who owned the textile factory at the edge of town. Everyone knew he treated his workers badly, especially the women. They worked long hours for little pay, and many got sick from the poor conditions. Another man watching her was Mr. Crenshaw, who ran a tavern that was known for trouble. The women who worked there were not treated with respect, and Eleanor had heard terrible stories about what happened to girls who ended up working for him. Her stomach turned as she realized these might be her only options. "Do I hear any bids?" the auctioneer called out. The crowd was quiet for a long moment. Eleanor closed her eyes and tried to think of her mother, who had always told her to be brave no matter what happened. £50, called out Mr. Briggs. Eleanor's heart sank. £50 meant she would be working for him for years, maybe her whole life. 60, said Mr. Crenshaw with a nasty smile. The auctioneer looked around hopefully. "Do I hear any other bids? This is a well-educated young lady we're talking about here." But the crowd remained mostly silent. A few people looked sorry for her, but sorry doesn't pay debts. Others seemed to enjoy the drama of watching a proud family fall so far. £70? Mr. Briggs called out, louder this time. Eleanor felt tears starting to form in her eyes, but she blinked them back. She wouldn't give these people the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Just as the auctioneer raised his hammer to close the bidding, a strong voice cut through the morning air. I'll pay the full debt. The entire crowd turned to see who had spoken. Eleanor's eyes went wide as she saw a tall man with dark hair pushing through the people. She recognized him, though she had never spoken to him. Thomas Whitmore was one of the most respected men in town, a successful merchant who owned several businesses, but what shocked everyone most was that Thomas had barely been seen in public since his wife died 2 years ago. He had become like a ghost, taking care of his business but avoiding social events and gatherings. "Mr. Whitmore," the auctioneer stuttered, clearly as surprised as everyone else. "Did you say the full debt? That's £500. "I did," Thomas replied calmly. He walked closer to the platform, and Eleanor could see his face clearly now. He looked sad, but there was something determined in his dark eyes. "Sir, are you certain?" the auctioneer asked. £500 is a considerable sum. "I'm certain," Thomas said, reaching into his coat and pulling out a leather pouch that clinked with coins. "I'll pay it now, in full." The crowd was buzzing with excitement now. This was better drama than they had expected. Eleanor stared down at this mysterious man who was about to change her life, but she couldn't understand why. "May I ask," the auctioneer said carefully, "what you plan to do with the young lady?" Thomas looked up at Eleanor for the first time, and she saw something in his expression that she couldn't quite understand. It wasn't the look the other men had given her. There was no meanness in it, no desire to own her or control her. Instead, he looked almost hopeful. "My son awaits you," Thomas said simply, his voice carrying across the quiet crowd without another word. He handed the money to the auctioneer and walked away, leaving Eleanor standing on the platform with her, mouth open and her mind racing with questions. What did he mean about his son? She had heard Thomas Whitmore had a son, but she had never seen him around town. And why would a man she had never even spoken to pay such a huge amount of money for her? As the auctioneer helped her down from the platform, Eleanor realized her life had just taken a turn she never could have imagined. She was no longer facing a terrible fate with cruel men, but she was walking into a complete mystery. What awaited her at the Whitmore house? And what had Thomas meant about his son? Only time would tell, but as Eleanor gathered her few remaining possessions, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. For the first time since her father died, she felt a tiny spark of hope. The ride to the Whitmore estate felt like the longest journey of Eleanor's life, even though it was only 3 miles outside of town. She sat in Thomas's simple but well-built carriage, her small bag of belongings clutched tightly in her hands. The only sounds were the horses' hooves on the dirt road and the creaking of the carriage wheels. Thomas sat across from her, but he hadn't said much since they left the town square. Every few minutes, Eleanor would steal a glance at him, trying to understand this man who had just spent £500 on a complete stranger. His face was kind but tired, like someone who had seen too much sadness. "Mr. Whitmore," Eleanor finally said, breaking the silence. Her voice sounded small in the quiet carriage. "I don't understand why you helped me. We've never even spoken before." Thomas looked out the window at the rolling hills and farms they were passing. "My wife always said that sometimes God puts people in our path for a reason," he said quietly. "I think today was one of those times." "But £500, Eleanor said, still amazed by the amount. "That's more money than most people see in years." "Money can be earned again," Thomas replied, finally looking at her. "But some opportunities to help only come once." Eleanor wanted to ask more questions, but something in his manner told her to wait. There was clearly more to this story, but Thomas would tell her when he was ready. As they rode, Eleanor couldn't help but remember the last time she had traveled this road. It was 2 years ago, when she and her father had been invited to a dinner party at the Morrison farm. Back then, she had ridden in their own fancy carriage, wearing a silk dress and matching gloves. She had been worried about nothing more important than whether the banker's son would ask her to dance. How different things were now. The Whitmore estate came into view as they rounded a bend in the road. Eleanor had seen it from a distance before, but never up close. It was a large, 2-story house built of gray stone, with tall windows and a wide front porch. Beautiful gardens surrounded the house, though Eleanor noticed they looked a bit overgrown, as if they hadn't been tended carefully in some time. "It's beautiful," Eleanor said honestly. "It was my wife's pride and joy," Thomas said, and Eleanor heard the sadness in his voice. "She spent hours in those gardens every day," said they made the house feel alive. As the carriage stopped in front of the house, Eleanor saw a woman come out of the front door. She was perhaps 50 years old, with graying hair pulled back in, a neat bun, and a serious expression on her face. "That's Mrs. Patterson," Thomas explained as he helped Eleanor down from the carriage. "She's been our housekeeper for 15 years. She'll show you to your room and explain your duties." Mrs. Patterson walked up to them, her sharp eyes looking Eleanor up and down. Eleanor could tell immediately that the housekeeper was not happy about this arrangement. "Mrs. Patterson," Thomas said, "this is Miss Eleanor Hartwell. She be staying with us to help with James." "Help with Master James?" Mrs. Patterson repeated, her eyebrows rising. "Sir, with respect, Master James won't see the doctor, won't see his old friends, won't even see you most days." "What makes you think he'll want to see a stranger?" Thomas's jaw tightened slightly. "That's exactly why we need to try something different. James needs someone who understands what it's like to lose everything." Eleanor felt her cheeks burn. She knew Thomas meant well, but being described as someone who had lost everything still stung. Mrs. Patterson clearly had more to say, but she held her tongue. "Very well, sir. Miss Hartwell, please follow me." Eleanor looked back at Thomas, who gave her an encouraging nod. "I'll speak with you this evening," he said. "Mrs. Patterson will explain everything you need to know." The inside of the Whitmore house was just as impressive as the outside. The front hall had a high ceiling with a crystal chandelier, and Eleanor could see elegant furniture and beautiful paintings throughout the rooms she glimpsed. But like the gardens, everything felt slightly neglected, as if the heart had gone out of the place. "The master's bedroom is downstairs since his accident," Mrs. Patterson explained as they climbed a wide staircase to the second floor. "Master Thomas thought it would be easier for you to be up here, near the family rooms." "His accident?" Eleanor asked. "What happened to him?" Mrs. Patterson stopped walking and turned to face Eleanor. 6 months ago, Master James was thrown from his horse during a storm. The horse came back, but we found Master James hours later, unconscious and badly hurt. The doctor said his back was damaged. He can't walk now, and the doctor doesn't think he ever will again. Eleanor felt her heart sink. A young man who couldn't walk would face challenges she could barely imagine, especially in a world where people judged others so harshly for any weakness. "He used to be so full of life," Mrs. Patterson continued, her stern expression softening a bit. "Always laughing, always making plans. He was engaged to be married to Miss Margaret Collins. Beautiful girl from a good family." "Was engaged?" Eleanor asked. "She broke it off a month after the accident," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice hard with disapproval. "Said she couldn't marry a man who might never walk again. Broke Master James's heart on top of everything else." They reached the top of the stairs, and Mrs. Patterson led Eleanor down a long hallway lined with family portraits. Eleanor noticed several paintings of a beautiful woman with kind eyes and dark hair. "That was the mistress," Mrs. Patterson said, following Eleanor's gaze. "Died of fever 2 years ago. This house hasn't been the same since." They stopped at a door near the end of the hallway. "This will be your room," Mrs. Patterson said, opening the door to reveal a comfortable bedroom with a large window overlooking the gardens. "Master James's room is just across the hall." Eleanor set her small bag on the bed and looked around. The room was nicer than any she had ever had, with a soft quilt on the bed and fresh flowers on the dresser. "What exactly am I supposed to do?" Eleanor asked. Mrs. Patterson sighed. "Honestly, I don't know. Master James won't let anyone help him except for basic needs. He stays in his room most of the time, reading or just staring out the window. He's angry at the world, and I can't say I'd blame him." "Has anyone tried to just talk to him?" Eleanor asked. "Talk to him?" Mrs. Patterson repeated. "Miss, that boy doesn't want to talk to anyone. He barely speaks to his own father." "What makes you think he'll want to talk to you?" Eleanor didn't have an answer for that. She had no experience with anything like this, but something inside her felt determined to try. The doctor comes once a week, Mrs. Patterson continued. Master Thomas has tried bringing in tutors and companions before, but Master James sends them all away, usually within a day or two. How many have there been? Eleanor asked. 4 in the past 3 months. The last one was a very proper lady from the city who was supposed to read to him and keep him company. Master James told her exactly what he thought of her pity, and she left the same day. Eleanor was starting to understand why Thomas had looked so hopeful when he saw her on the auction block. He wasn't just helping her out of kindness. He was desperate to help his son, and maybe he thought someone who had faced her own troubles might be different. When do I meet him? Eleanor asked. Tomorrow morning, Mrs. Patterson said. But don't get your hopes up. Master James has made it very clear that he doesn't want help from anyone. That evening, Eleanor ate dinner alone in the kitchen with Mrs. Patterson and the cook, a friendly woman named Betty. Thomas had gone to his study and didn't join them. Eleanor learned that this had become normal since his wife died. The family rarely ate together anymore. As Eleanor got ready for bed that night, she stood at her window looking out at the dark gardens. Somewhere across the hall was a young man whose life had been turned upside down just like hers had been. The difference was that she still had hope for the future. From what Mrs. Patterson had said, James had given up completely. Eleanor had no idea how to help someone who didn't want to be helped. She had no training as a nurse or a companion. She was just a girl whose world had fallen apart, trying to figure out how to build something new. But as she finally climbed into bed, Eleanor made herself a promise. She might not know how to help James Whitmore, but she was going to try. After all, Thomas had saved her from a terrible fate. The least she could do was try to help his son. Tomorrow would bring her first real test in this strange new life. Eleanor fell asleep wondering what she would find when she finally met the mysterious young man across the hall. Eleanor woke up before dawn, her stomach twisted with nervousness. She had barely slept, spending most of the night thinking about what she would say to James when she met him. Mrs. Patterson had made it clear that he didn't want visitors, but Eleanor couldn't just hide in her room forever. She dressed carefully in her one remaining decent dress, a simple brown one that was plain but clean. Looking in the mirror, she tried to imagine what James would think when he saw her. Would he see just another person sent to pity him? Or would he somehow understand that she knew what it felt like to have your whole world disappear overnight? The house was quiet as Eleanor made her way downstairs for breakfast. She found Mrs. Patterson in the kitchen, already busy preparing a tray of food. "That's for Master James," Mrs. Patterson explained when she saw Eleanor looking at the tray. "He takes his meals in his room." "Every meal?" Eleanor asked. "Every meal for the past 4 months," Mrs. Patterson confirmed. "He says he doesn't want to be stared at or pitied." Eleanor studied the tray. There was fresh bread, eggs, and tea, but also a small vase with a single flower from the garden. Despite everything, someone was still trying to make James feel cared for. "Mrs. Patterson," Eleanor said carefully, "what if I took the tray up to him?" The housekeeper stopped what she was doing and stared at Eleanor. "Miss, I don't think that's a good idea. Master James doesn't like strangers, especially not first thing in the morning." "But I have to meet him sometime," Eleanor pointed out. "And maybe it would be easier if I was bringing him something he needs instead of just showing up to talk." Mrs. Patterson looked doubtful, but after a moment she shrugged. "I suppose it can't go worse than the other attempts. But don't say I didn't warn you when he sends you away with harsh words." Eleanor picked up the tray, surprised by how heavy it was. Her hands were shaking slightly as she climbed the stairs. When she reached James's door, she paused for a moment. Gathering her courage, she knocked gently. "Mr. Whitmore?" "I have your breakfast." There was silence from inside the room. Eleanor waited, then knocked again. "I didn't ask for company with my breakfast," came a voice from inside. It was deep and clear, but there was an edge to it that made Eleanor's stomach tighten. "I'm not company," Eleanor called back. "I'm just bringing your food." "Mrs. Patterson always brings my food. Who are you?" Eleanor took a deep breath. "My name is Eleanor Hartwell. Your father asked me to help take care of you." The silence that followed was even longer this time. Finally, Eleanor heard the sound of something being moved. And then the door opened. The young man who looked out at her was not what she had expected. James Whitmore was perhaps 25 years old, with the same dark hair as his father, but lighter eyes that were currently staring at her with suspicion and anger. He was sitting in a wooden chair with wheels that he had obviously built or modified himself. Even sitting down, Eleanor could tell he was tall, and had been strong before his accident, but what struck her most was how bitter he looked. His mouth was set in a hard line and his eyes held no warmth at all. "So you're the latest one," James said, looking her up and down. "Let me guess. Some proper lady who thinks she can cheer up the poor, crippled boy with kind words and gentle smiles?" Eleanor felt her cheeks burn at his harsh tone, but she tried to keep her voice steady. "Actually, I'm just someone who needs a place to stay and work to do. Your father was kind enough to help me when I had nowhere else to go." James's eyebrows rose slightly. "Help you how?" "He paid my family's debts so I wouldn't have to work in terrible conditions for cruel people," Eleanor said simply. "In return, I'm supposed to help take care of you." "Take care of me?" James's voice was full of scorn. "I don't need taking care of. I need to be left alone." "Well, that's too bad," Eleanor said, surprising herself with her boldness. "Because your father saved me from a very bad situation, and I intend to earn my keep here. So you're going to have to put up with me whether you like it or not." James stared at her, clearly not expecting that response. Most people probably tried to be gentle and understanding with him. Eleanor realized she was too nervous and too grateful to Thomas to be gentle. "Fine," James said after a moment. "Put the tray on the table and then leave." Eleanor walked into the room and set the tray down on a small table by the window. She couldn't help but look around as she did. The room was large and comfortable, with bookshelves covering most of one wall, but the books looked like they hadn't been touched in months, and there were plates and cups scattered around that clearly hadn't been taken away. "This place is a mess," Eleanor said without thinking. "I beg your pardon?" James's voice was dangerous now. Eleanor realized what she had said and felt her face turn red. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be rude. It's just that this is such a beautiful room, and it seems like it could be more comfortable if it was tidied up." "I don't want it tidied up," James said coldly. "I want to be left alone in my mess, just like I want to be left alone in general." "Why?" Eleanor asked. The question seemed to catch James off guard. "Why what? Why do you want to be left alone? What good does it do you?" James stared at her like she had asked him why water was wet. "What good? Look at me. I'm 25 years old and I can't walk. I can't ride horses anymore. I can't dance. I can't do half the things that make life worth living. The woman I was going to marry decided she couldn't stand the sight of me. So, excuse me if I don't see much point in pretending everything is wonderful." Eleanor felt a flash of anger at his self-pity. "At least you have a home," she said sharply. "At least you have a father who loves you and people who care about you. At least you have money and food and a warm bed." "Oh, I see," James said with a bitter laugh. "You're going to tell me how grateful I should be because some people have it worse." "How original." "No," Eleanor said, her anger growing stronger. "I'm going to tell you that feeling sorry for yourself isn't going to make anything better. Trust me, I know." "You know?" James repeated. "What could you possibly know about losing everything that matters to you? 3 months ago, I lived in a big house with servants and beautiful clothes," Eleanor said, her voice rising. "I was engaged to be married to a good man, and I thought my life was perfect. Then my father's gambling debts destroyed everything. He died from the shame and stress. I lost my home, my money, my reputation, and my future husband. Yesterday morning, I was standing on an auction block about to be sold to pay debts I didn't even know existed." James's angry expression had changed. "To surprise, you were sold?" "Almost," Eleanor said. "Your father saved me from that. So, yes, I do know what it's like to lose everything. The difference is that I'm not giving up." "It's not the same thing," James said, but his voice had lost some of its edge. "You're right," Eleanor agreed. "It's not the same. But pain is pain, and sitting in a dark room feeling sorry for yourself isn't going to make it go away. They stared at each other for a long moment. Eleanor was breathing hard, surprised by her own boldness. She had never spoken to anyone like that before, especially not someone she had just met. Finally, James looked away. "You don't understand?" he said quietly. "Everyone looks at me differently now. They see a broken man who can't even walk across a room without this chair. Margaret couldn't stand it, and she was supposed to love me." "Then Margaret was a fool," Eleanor said firmly. "And anyone else who judges you for something that wasn't your fault is a fool too." James looked back at her, something different in his expression now. "You really believe that?" "I believe that you're more than what happened to you," Eleanor said. "Just like I'm more than my father's mistakes or the fact that I was almost sold. Like a piece of furniture." For the first time since she had met him, James's expression softened slightly. "What are you supposed to do here, exactly?" he asked. "I honestly don't know," Eleanor admitted. "Your father said you needed someone to help take care of you, but Mrs. Patterson says you don't want help. So I suppose I'll just have to figure it out as I go." James was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the gardens below. "Those, were my mother's gardens," he said finally. "She died 2 years ago. Mrs. Patterson told me," Eleanor said gently. "I'm sorry." "She always said that giving up was the only real failure in life," James continued. "I suppose she wouldn't be very proud of me right now." Eleanor felt her heart soften toward this angry, hurt young man. "Maybe she would understand that you needed time to grieve," she said. "But maybe she would also want you to eventually find a way to keep living." James looked at her again, and this time Eleanor saw something different in his eyes. The anger was still there, but there was also curiosity. "You're not what I expected," he said. "What did you expect? Someone who would try to cheer me up, or—" "Tell me everything happens for a reason," James said. "Someone who would treat me like I'm made of glass." "I don't know you well enough to treat you like anything yet," Eleanor said honestly. "But I can tell you're intelligent and you're stronger than you think you are. Feeling sorry for yourself is a choice, just like getting better is a choice." James was quiet for a long time, turning his wheeled chair to look out the window again. Eleanor wasn't sure if she should stay or go. "You can come back tomorrow," he said finally, not looking at her. "With breakfast. But don't expect me to be grateful for the company." The next morning, Eleanor knocked on James's door with his breakfast tray, just as she had promised. This time, he opened the door more quickly. "You actually came back," he said, sounding surprised. "I said I would," Eleanor replied, walking into the room and setting the tray down. She noticed that some of the scattered dishes from yesterday had been cleared away. For the next week, Eleanor followed the same routine. She brought James his breakfast each morning, and they would talk for a few minutes before she left him alone for the rest of the day. Their conversations were careful at first, like two cats circling each other, but gradually they became more natural. Eleanor learned that James had been studying engineering at university before his accident. He had planned to help his father expand the family business by designing better equipment for their shops and warehouses. Now those plans seemed impossible to him. "I can't even get down the stairs without help," James said one morning, his voice full of frustration. "How am I supposed to visit work sites or inspect machinery?" "Maybe you don't need to visit every site yourself," Eleanor suggested. "Maybe you could design things here and have other people check on them for you." James looked at her like she had suggested he could fly. "You don't understand how business works." "You're right, I don't," Eleanor admitted. "But I understand that smart people find ways to solve problems instead of just giving up on them." This kind of direct response had become Eleanor's way with James. She didn't try to coddle him or pretend his challenges weren't real. Instead, she pushed back when he made excuses, and she asked questions that made him think differently about his situation. Slowly, James began to respond. He started asking Eleanor about her own experiences, curious about how she had managed to keep going after losing everything. "Weren't you angry?" he asked one day as they sat by his window, looking out at the overgrown gardens. "Furious," Eleanor said honestly. "I was angry at my father for gambling away our future." I was angry at the people who came to take our house. I was angry at God for letting it all happen. What changed? Eleanor thought about it. I realized that being angry wasn't going to bring my father back or get our house back. It was just making me miserable. So I decided to focus on what I could control instead of what I couldn't. And what could you control? How I acted, how I treated people, whether I gave up or kept trying to build something better. James was quiet for a long time after that. Eleanor could see him thinking, working through ideas in his mind. One morning, when Eleanor brought his breakfast, she found James sitting at his desk with papers spread out in front of him. It was the first time she had seen him away from the window. What are you working on? She asked. James looked embarrassed. It's probably stupid. I was just thinking about what you said, about finding ways to solve problems. I started sketching some ideas for equipment that could be operated by someone who couldn't walk. Eleanor moved closer to look at the papers. Even though she didn't understand engineering, she could see that the drawings were detailed and careful. These look amazing. Have you shown them to your father? No, James said quickly. They're just ideas. They probably wouldn't work in real life. How do you know unless you try? Eleanor asked. Your father is a businessman? He would know if these ideas have value. But James shook his head and put the papers away. Eleanor could see that he still didn't believe in himself enough to share his work. That afternoon, Eleanor was helping Mrs. Patterson in the kitchen when Thomas came in looking worried. Has James seemed different to you lately? He asked Eleanor. Different. How? Eleanor replied, though she knew exactly what he meant. He asked me to bring him some of his engineering books from storage. It's the first time he's shown interest in anything since the accident. Mrs. Patterson says you're the only person he talks to. Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. We just have breakfast together and talk for a little while. Nothing special. Thomas studied her carefully. Whatever you're doing, it's working. I haven't seen hope in his eyes for months. But yesterday when I mentioned possibly expanding one of our warehouses, he actually asked questions about it. Eleanor was pleased to hear this, but she was also worried. She could feel James starting to trust her, and she didn't want to let him down. The problem was that she still didn't really know what she was doing. That evening, Eleanor was walking in the gardens when she heard the sound of wheels on the gravel path behind her. She turned to see James approaching in his chair, moving slowly, but steadily along the path. You're outside, she said, not able to hide her surprise. Don't make a big deal about it, James said, but Eleanor could see that he was pleased with himself. I just wanted some fresh air. They walked and rolled together through the gardens as the sun set. The flowers and vegetables were overgrown, but they were still beautiful in the golden evening light. Your mother must have loved this place, Eleanor said. She did. She used to say that gardens were proof that beautiful things could grow even after they seemed dead, James replied. She would spend hours out here, especially when she was sad or worried about something. What would she think about the gardens? Now? Eleanor asked gently. James looked around at the overgrown beds and unpruned trees. She would probably say they need some attention, but that they're not beyond saving, Eleanor smiled. She sounds like a wise woman. She was. She always believed that problems were just puzzles waiting to be solved. She never let anyone in the family give up on anything, no matter how hard it seemed. Maybe that's where you get your engineering mind, Eleanor suggested. James was quiet for a moment. I showed my father those drawings today, he said finally. Eleanor felt her heart jump with excitement, but she tried to keep her voice calm. What did he think? He wants me to develop them further. He thinks they could be really useful, not just for people like me, but for anyone who needs to operate heavy machinery safely. That's wonderful, James. You should be proud. I'm scared, James admitted. What if I work on them and they don't work? What if I'm just fooling myself into thinking I can still do something useful? Eleanor stopped walking and turned to face him. What if they do work? What if you create something that helps people and makes you feel proud of yourself again? And what if they don't? Then you'll try something else, Eleanor said simply. But at least you'll be trying instead of just sitting in your room feeling sorry for yourself. James laughed. The first real laugh Eleanor had heard from him. You have a way of putting things very simply. Life is simpler than people make it sometimes, Eleanor said. We just complicate it by worrying about things that might not even happen. As they made their way back to the house, Eleanor felt a sense of accomplishment that was new to her. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was truly helping. Someone not just taking care of household tasks or being decorative at social events, but she also felt something else growing inside her, something that made her nervous. She was starting to care about James as more than just someone she was helping. She looked forward to their morning conversations, and she found herself thinking about him throughout the day. This worried her. James was the son of the man who had saved her from a terrible fate. He was from a wealthy, respected family, while she had nothing and no reputation to speak of. Whatever feelings might be growing between them could only lead to trouble. But as they reached the house and James thanked her for the walk, Eleanor realized it might already be too late to guard her heart. She was starting to fall for this broken, brilliant, complicated young man, and she had no idea what to do about it. That night, as she got ready for bed, Eleanor made herself a promise. She would continue to help James heal and find his purpose again. But she would be very careful not to let her own feelings get in the way. She had no way of knowing that James was lying in his bed across the hall, thinking about her and making himself a very similar promise. For the first time in months, both of them fell asleep with something to look forward to the next day. The walls that James had built around himself were starting to crumble, and Eleanor was the one helping to tear them down. But neither of them realized yet that the process was changing them both in ways they never expected. 2 months had passed since Eleanor's arrival at the Whitmore estate, and the changes in James were impossible to ignore. He was spending most of his days working on his engineering designs, and he had started joining his father for dinner several times a week. Most importantly, he was smiling again. Eleanor found herself looking forward to their morning conversations more than anything else in her day. James had a sharp mind and a dry sense of humor that made her laugh. He was also surprisingly kind when he forgot to be angry at the world. One morning, Eleanor knocked on his door to find it already open. James was at his desk, but instead of working on his usual engineering drawings, he was sketching something else. "What's that?" Eleanor asked, setting down his breakfast tray. James looked up, and Eleanor was surprised to see him blush slightly. "It's nothing important, just an idea I had." Eleanor moved closer and saw that he had been drawing plans for what looked like a garden tool. "Is this for the gardens?" "Maybe," James said, still looking embarrassed. "I noticed you looking at them when we walk in the evenings. They're in terrible shape, and I thought maybe we could work on them together, if you wanted to." Eleanor felt her heart flutter. The idea of working alongside James on something beautiful and peaceful sounded wonderful. "I'd love that, but I don't know much about gardening. My mother taught me a lot before she died," James said, "and I've been thinking about tools that could make it easier for someone in my situation to help with the work." They spent the next hour talking about plants and garden design, and Eleanor was amazed by how much James knew. His face lit up as he talked about his mother's favorite flowers and the vegetables she used to grow. "She always said that gardens were like people," James told Eleanor. "They need attention and care, but they also need room to grow in their own way." "That sounds like something she would say," Eleanor replied, thinking about the little she knew of James's mother from the portraits around the house. "Would you like to see her garden journal?" James asked suddenly. She wrote down everything she planted and when, along with notes about what worked and what didn't. Eleanor nodded eagerly, and James wheeled over to a bookshelf and pulled out a leather-bound book. As they looked through it together, Eleanor felt like she was getting to know the woman who had raised James. The journal was full of careful observations and beautiful little sketches of flowers and plants. "She was an artist too," Eleanor said, admiring a detailed drawing of roses. "She was good at everything," James said softly. "Sometimes I think that's why it's been so hard for Father and me since she died. She made everything in this house feel alive and happy." Eleanor looked at James's face as he turned the pages of his mother's journal. She could see love there, but also sadness that still ran deep. "James," she said carefully, "do you think your mother would want you and your father to be happy again?" "Of course," James replied immediately. "Then maybe working on her gardens would be a way to honor her memory while also making something beautiful for yourselves." James looked at Eleanor for a long moment, and she saw something warm and grateful in his expression. "You have a way of making things seem possible," he said quietly. Eleanor felt her cheeks warm under his gaze. There was something different in the way James was looking at her lately, something that made her heart beat faster and her thoughts get confused. "I should let you get back to your work," she said, standing up quickly, but as she reached the door, James called her name. "Eleanor? Thank you for everything. I know my father brought you here to help me, but you've done more than that. You've reminded me that life can still be good, even when it's different than what we planned." Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes. "You've helped me too," she said. "You've shown me that I can be useful for more than just keeping house or looking pretty at parties." That afternoon, Eleanor was in the kitchen helping Betty prepare dinner when Mrs. Patterson came in looking agitated. "There are visitors here to see Master James," she announced. "Miss Margaret Collins and her new husband." Eleanor felt her stomach drop. Margaret was James's former fiancée, the woman who had broken their engagement after his accident. "What do they want?" Betty asked, echoing Eleanor's thoughts. "I don't know, but Master James has agreed to see them," Mrs. Patterson said, shaking her head. "I hope he knows what he's doing." Eleanor spent the next hour trying to focus on her work, but her mind kept wandering to what was happening in the front parlor. Finally, she couldn't stand it anymore and found an excuse to walk past the room. Through the partially open door, she could see James in his wheeled chair, facing a beautiful blonde woman in an expensive blue dress. Next to her sat a well-dressed man who was probably her new husband. "You look well, James," Eleanor heard Margaret say in a sweet voice that somehow sounded false to Eleanor's ears. "Thank you," James replied, his voice polite but distant. "I heard you've been working on some kind of inventions," Margaret continued. "How ... interesting." The way she said "interesting" made Eleanor angry. It sounded like Margaret thought James was just playing with toys to pass the time. "I suppose you've heard that Robert and I are expecting our first child," Margaret went on, placing her hand on her husband's arm. "Congratulations," James said, and Eleanor was proud of how steady his voice sounded. "I wanted to come and see you because I was worried," Margaret said, her voice taking on a tone of fake concern. "I heard that your father has taken in some kind of charity case. A girl from a disgraced family?" Eleanor felt her face burn with shame and anger. She knew Margaret was talking about her. "Miss Hartwell is not a charity case," James said, and Eleanor heard a sharp edge in his voice now. "She's a valued member of this household." "Oh, James," Margaret said with a little laugh. "You always were too kind for your own good. But surely you can see that it's not appropriate for an unmarried woman of questionable background to be living in the same house as an unmarried man." "People are starting to talk." "Let them talk," James replied firmly. "But don't you see how this reflects on your family's reputation?" Margaret pressed. "Your father is a respected businessman. Having some auction girl living under his roof could damage his standing in the community." Eleanor had heard enough. She walked quickly away from the door, her hands shaking with anger and hurt. Margaret's words stung because there was some truth to them. Eleanor was living in the Whitmore house under unusual circumstances, and she knew that some people in town probably were talking about it. 20 minutes later, Eleanor heard the front door close and saw Margaret and her husband's carriage pulling away from the house. She was in the kitchen when James wheeled in, looking for her. "Eleanor," he said, "I need to talk to you." "If this is about what Margaret said, you don't need to explain anything to me," Eleanor said quickly, not looking at him. "Yes, I do," James said firmly. "What she said was cruel and wrong. Was it wrong?" Eleanor asked, finally meeting his eyes. "I am from a disgraced family. I was almost sold at auction. People probably are talking about me being here." I don't care what people say, James said, moving his chair closer to her. You belong here, Eleanor. You've become important to me. The way he said it made Eleanor's heart race, but it also scared her. James, we have to be careful. Your father saved me from a terrible situation, and I'm grateful. But I can't let people think there's something inappropriate happening here. What if there was something happening here? James asked quietly. Would that be so terrible? Eleanor stared at him, hardly believing what she was hearing. James, you can't mean that. Can't I? Eleanor, these past few months with you have been the happiest I've been since my accident. You make me want to be better, to build something meaningful with my life. You make me laugh, and you challenge me, and you see me as more than just a broken man who can't walk. Eleanor felt tears starting to form in her eyes. You don't understand. I have nothing to offer you. No money, no family, no reputation. You're the son of one of the most respected families in the county. And you're the woman who saved me from giving up on life completely, James said. Eleanor, I'm falling in love with you. The words hung in the air between them like something fragile and precious. Eleanor felt her heart breaking and soaring at the same time. James, she whispered, I'm falling in love with you too. But that doesn't mean we can do anything about it. Why not? Because your father didn't save me so that I could complicate your life? Eleanor said, wiping away tears that had started to fall. He saved me so that I could help you heal and move forward. If people start gossiping about us, it could hurt your family's reputation and your future prospects. James reached out and took her hand. My future prospects don't matter if they don't include you. Eleanor looked down at their joined hands, memorizing the feeling of his warm fingers wrapped around hers. Then, with all the strength she could manage, she pulled her hand away. They have to matter, she said softly. Because I care about you too much to let you throw away your future for someone like me. Before James could respond, Eleanor hurried out of the kitchen, leaving him sitting alone with his heart full of words he hadn't been able to say. That night, Eleanor lay in her bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every word of their conversation. She loved James, and he loved her, but The days following James's confession were the most difficult Eleanor had experienced since coming to the Whitmore estate. She and James still had their morning conversations, but there was a tension between them now, an awareness of feelings that hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. James had thrown himself into his engineering work with renewed energy, as if staying busy could help him forget what had happened between them. Eleanor tried to do the same, spending her days helping Mrs. Patterson with household tasks and reading in the library during her free time. But both of them were struggling with the same question. What were they supposed to do with love that felt impossible? One morning, Eleanor was in the kitchen when she heard voices coming from Thomas's study. The door was slightly open, and she could hear James talking to his father in an excited voice. The warehouse owners in the next county want to see the designs, James was saying. They think the lifting mechanisms could save them money and prevent worker injuries. That's wonderful news, son, Thomas replied, and Eleanor could hear the pride in his voice. I knew your ideas had real value. I want to travel there next week to demonstrate how the equipment would work, James continued. I've been practicing getting around in different types of buildings, and I think I can manage it. Eleanor felt a mixture of pride and sadness as she listened. James was becoming the man he was meant to be, confident and capable despite his limitations. She was happy for him, but she also knew that his success would probably mean less time together, and eventually it might mean he would meet someone more suitable to share his life with. That evening, Eleanor was walking in the gardens when she heard the sound of James's wheeled chair approaching. She had been avoiding their evening walks lately, but tonight he had found her anyway. You've been hiding from me, James said as he rolled up beside her. I haven't been hiding, Eleanor protested, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. Eleanor, we need to talk about what's happening between us. Pretending these feelings don't exist isn't working for either of us. Eleanor stopped walking and turned to face him. What do you want me to say, James? That I love you? I've already told you that. But love doesn't solve the practical problems we would face. What practical problems? James asked. I have a good income from my family's business, and now I have my own work that's starting to be successful. I can provide for a wife. It's not about money, Eleanor said, frustrated that he didn't seem to understand. It's about what people would think. It's about your reputation and your family's standing in the community. James was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was thoughtful. Do you remember what you told me the first day we met? You said that feeling sorry for yourself is a choice, and getting better is a choice too. Yes, Eleanor said, wondering where he was going with this. Well, I think caring about what other people think is also a choice. And it's a choice that's keeping us both miserable. Eleanor felt tears starting to form in her eyes. James, it's not that simple, isn't it? Eleanor, I spent months after my accident believing that my life was over because I thought other people would see me as less than a whole man. You helped me realize that I was wrong about that. Now you're doing the same thing, letting other people's possible opinions control your choices. Eleanor knew there was truth in what James was saying, but she also knew he didn't fully understand the position she was in. You don't know what it's like to have people whisper about you and judge you for things you couldn't control? She said, Don't I? James asked with a bitter laugh. Eleanor, half the town probably thinks I'm a pitiful invalid who should be grateful for any attention at all. The other half probably thinks I'm a burden on my family. If I cared what all those people thought, I would never leave my room again. Eleanor stared at him, realizing that he was right. James had faced just as much judgment and gossip as she had, maybe more. The difference was that he had decided not to let it control his life. But what about your father? Eleanor asked. He's done so much for both of us. What if our being together somehow hurts his business or his reputation? Why don't we ask him? James suggested. Eleanor's eyes went wide. Ask him what? Ask him how he would feel about his son marrying the woman he brought here to help heal our family. Eleanor felt her heart stop. James, you can't be serious. I'm completely serious. Eleanor, I want to marry you. I want to spend my life with you, building something together. I want to work on my mother's gardens with you and raise children who will play in those gardens. I want to grow old with you. The picture James painted was so beautiful that Eleanor felt her heart breaking all over again. James, before you say no, I want you to consider something, James continued. What if you're wrong about what other people would think? What if most people would see our marriage as a love story instead of a scandal? What if the only people who would judge us harshly are people whose opinions don't matter anyway? Eleanor looked into James's eyes and saw hope there, but also determination. She realized that he had thought this through carefully, that this wasn't just a romantic impulse. And what if I'm right? She asked quietly. What if marrying me does damage your reputation and your father's business? Then we'll deal with it together, James said simply. Eleanor, I've already lost the use of my legs, my first engagement, and months of my life to fear and self-pity. I'm not willing to lose the woman I love because I'm afraid of what might happen. Eleanor felt something shift inside her as she listened to James's words. For months, she had been so focused on being grateful for Thomas's rescue that she had forgotten to think about what she actually wanted for her own life. What if your father says no? She asked. Then we'll have to decide what matters more to us, his approval or our happiness, James replied. But I don't think he'll say no. I think he'll be happy to see his son choosing love over fear. Eleanor was quiet for a long time, thinking about everything James had said. Finally, she looked up at him and spoke. If we do this, if we ask your father for his blessing, I need you to promise me something. Anything, James said immediately. Promise me that if he says no, or if we face problems because of our marriage, you won't blame me for it later. Promise me that you won't wake up one day and wish you had married someone more suitable. James reached out and took both of her hands in his. Eleanor, the only thing I would ever regret is not fighting for us. You are the most suitable woman for me because you're the one who makes me want to be the best version of myself. Eleanor felt the last of her resistance crumbling. When do you want to talk to him? Tonight, James said without hesitation. I don't want to wait another day to start our real life together. Eleanor's stomach filled with butterflies, but she nodded. All right, tonight. An hour later, they found Thomas in his study working on account books by lamplight. He looked up when they entered, and Eleanor saw his eyebrows rise in surprise when he noticed that she and James were holding hands. "Father," James began, his voice steady despite the importance of what he was about to say, "Eleanor and I have something to discuss with you." Thomas set down his pen and gave them his full attention. "I'm listening." "I want to marry Eleanor," James said directly. "I love her and she loves me, and we want to build a life together." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, looking back and forth between them. Eleanor held her breath, waiting for his response. Finally, Thomas smiled. "It's about time," he said. Eleanor blinked in surprise. "What?" "It's about time you two figured out what everyone else in this house has known for weeks," Thomas said, standing up and walking around his desk toward them. "The way you look at each other, the way you've both changed since Eleanor arrived. I was beginning to wonder if I was going to have to lock you in a room together to force you to be honest about your feelings." Eleanor felt tears of relief starting to fall. "You're not upset?" "Upset?" Thomas repeated. "Eleanor, you've given me back my son? You've helped him remember who he is and what he's capable of. Why would I be upset about him wanting to marry the woman who saved his life? But what about my background?" Eleanor asked. "What about what people will say?" Thomas looked at her with the same kind expression she had seen that day at the auction. "My dear girl, anyone who would judge my family poorly for welcoming you into it is not someone whose opinion I value. You have proven your character through your actions, not your ancestry." James squeezed Eleanor's hand. "See, I told you he would understand." "When would you like to have the wedding?" Thomas asked practically. Eleanor and James looked at each other, both realizing that they hadn't actually discussed the details. "Soon," James said. "We've already waited too long to start our life together." "Spring would be beautiful," Eleanor said softly. "When your mother's gardens are in bloom." Thomas's eyes grew misty at the mention of his late wife. "She would have loved Eleanor," he said to James. "She always said that the best marriages were between people who made each other stronger." As Eleanor sat in Thomas's study that night, planning her wedding to the man she loved, she could hardly believe how much her life had changed. 6 months ago, she had been standing on an auction block with nothing but the clothes on her back. Now she was surrounded by people who loved her. The weeks leading up to Eleanor and James's wedding were filled with a happiness that seemed to spread throughout the entire Whitmore household. Even Mrs. Patterson, who had been skeptical of Eleanor at first, had warmed up to the idea of having a new mistress of the house. "It's been too quiet around here for too long," she confided to Eleanor one morning as they planned the wedding breakfast. "This house needs laughter and love again." Eleanor was grateful for Mrs. Patterson's support, especially when it came to the practical details of planning a wedding. Since Eleanor had no family to help her, Mrs. Patterson and Betty had stepped in to fill that role. "We'll need to order fabric for your dress," Mrs. Patterson said, making notes on a piece of paper. "And we should start planning the menu for the celebration dinner." "I don't need anything fancy," Eleanor said, though she was touched by how much care everyone was putting into her special day. "Just something simple and nice." "Nonsense," Mrs. Patterson replied firmly. "Master James is marrying the woman who brought him back to life. This calls for a proper celebration." Meanwhile, James was working harder than ever on his engineering projects. The success with the warehouse equipment had led to more opportunities, and he was becoming known as an innovative designer who could solve problems that others couldn't. "I want to be able to provide well for Eleanor," he told his father one evening as they went over business accounts together. "I want her to never worry about money or security again." "Son," Thomas said gently, "Eleanor isn't marrying you for financial security. She's marrying you because she loves you." "I know that," James replied, "but she's already been through losing everything once. I want to make sure that never happens to her again." Thomas smiled at his son's protectiveness. James had always been a caring person, but his love for Eleanor had brought out a strength and determination that Thomas hadn't seen since before the accident. One afternoon, Eleanor was in the garden working on clearing out some of the overgrown flower beds when she heard voices coming from the front of the house. She recognized one of them as Margaret's voice, and her stomach tightened with anxiety. She made her way around to the front garden, where she could see but not be easily seen. Margaret was standing on the front steps with two other well-dressed women Eleanor didn't recognize. They were clearly talking about the upcoming wedding. "I heard they're having the ceremony right here on the estate," one of the women was saying. "How conventional. Well, what did you expect?" Margaret replied with a nasty laugh. "It's not like she could have a proper church wedding with her background. Can you imagine the scandal if they tried to have it at St. Mary's?" "I still can't believe James is actually going through with this," the third woman added. "Marrying that auction girl. His poor mother must be rolling in her grave." Eleanor felt like she had been slapped. She knew that some people would gossip about her marriage to James, but hearing it spoken out loud still hurt. "Mark my words," Margaret continued, "this marriage will ruin the Whitmore family's reputation. Thomas must be beside himself, but he's too kind to say no to his crippled son's foolish romantic notions." Eleanor had heard enough. She turned to walk back toward the house, but found James sitting in his wheeled chair on the path behind her. From his expression she could tell he had heard everything too. "How long have you been there?" Eleanor asked quietly. "Long enough," James replied, his face dark with anger. "How dare they talk about you like that? How dare they talk about us like that?" Eleanor sat down on a garden bench beside him. "James, maybe they're right. Maybe this marriage will cause problems for your family." "Eleanor, we've been through this," James said firmly. "I don't care what people like Margaret think. Their opinions don't matter, but what if it affects your business? What if people don't want to work with you because of the scandal?" James took her hands in his. "Eleanor, look at me. Do you love me?" "Yes," Eleanor replied without hesitation. "Do you want to spend your life with me?" "More than anything." "Then nothing else matters." "Eleanor, if people judge us for choosing love over convention, then they're not the kind of people we want in our lives anyway." Eleanor wanted to believe him, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were making a mistake. "What if we waited longer? What if we had a longer engagement so people could get used to the idea?" "No," James said immediately. "Eleanor, we've already waited long enough. I'm not going to let other people's prejudices delay our happiness any longer." That evening at dinner, Thomas noticed that Eleanor seemed troubled. "Is everything all right, my dear?" he asked. Eleanor hesitated, then decided to be honest. "I overheard some women talking today about our wedding. They think it will be a scandal for your family." Thomas set down his fork and looked at her seriously. "Eleanor, I want you to listen to me very carefully. In my 50 years of life, I have learned that the people who gossip the most usually have the least interesting things happening in their own lives. Their opinions are not worth sacrificing your happiness for." "But what if they're right about the business implications?" Eleanor asked. "What if associating with me hurts your reputation?" "Then I'll find new business associates," Thomas said simply. "Eleanor, you are going to be my daughter-in-law. Anyone who has a problem with that is not someone I want to do business with anyway." James reached across the table and took Eleanor's hand. "Father's right. We're building our own life together, Eleanor. We get to decide what matters to us." The next morning, Eleanor woke up with a new sense of determination. She loved James, and he loved her, and they were going to build something beautiful together, despite what anyone else thought. She found James in his study, working on wedding preparations of his own. He had been designing and building special equipment to make their new shared life more comfortable and practical. "What are you working on today?" Eleanor asked, settling into the chair beside his desk that had become hers over the past few months. "A surprise for after we're married," James said with a mysterious smile. "But I can show you this." He pulled out a set of drawings that took Eleanor's breath away. They were plans for a completely redesigned garden, with paths wide enough for James's chair and raised beds that would be easier for both of them to tend. There were areas for flowers, vegetables, and herbs, plus a small greenhouse for starting plants in the winter. James, this is incredible, Eleanor said, studying the detailed drawings. When did you have time to design all this? I've been working on it at night, James admitted. I wanted to create something that would be ours together. A place where we could work side by side and watch things grow. Eleanor felt tears coming to her eyes as she looked at the plans. This wasn't just a garden design, it was a blueprint for their future life together. It's perfect, she whispered. We'll start building it as soon as the weather warms up, James said. Our first project as husband and wife. That afternoon, Eleanor was in her room when Mrs. Patterson knocked on the door. You have a visitor. Miss Eleanor, she announced. A young woman who says she's from your old neighborhood? Eleanor's heart jumped. She couldn't imagine who it could be, since she had assumed all her old friends had forgotten about her after her family's disgrace. She made her way downstairs to find a familiar face waiting in the front parlor. It was Catherine Miller, the daughter of the local doctor. She and Eleanor had been friends as children, though they had grown apart as they got older. Eleanor, Catherine said, standing up with a bright smile. I hope you don't mind me calling on you like this. I heard about your engagement and I just had to come and congratulate you. Eleanor was touched by Catherine's kindness. Thank you. I wasn't sure anyone from town would. Well, I wasn't sure how people would react. Catherine's expression grew more serious. Eleanor, I'll be honest with you. There has been some talk about your engagement, but not all of it has been unkind. Many people remember what a good family yours was before your father's troubles. And everyone can see how much happier the Whitmore family seems since you've been. Here, really? Eleanor asked, feeling a spark of hope. Really? My father says that Thomas Whitmore seems like a different man these days. And he's heard wonderful things about James's new engineering work. People are starting to see that this isn't just some impulsive romance. It's a real partnership between two people who care about each other. Eleanor felt some of the weight she'd been carrying lift from her shoulders. Maybe she and James had been right to believe that their love was stronger than other people's prejudices. There's something else, Catherine continued. I brought you something. She pulled a small wrapped package from her bag. It was my grandmother's. She would have wanted you to have it for your wedding day. Eleanor unwrapped the package to find a delicate lace handkerchief embroidered with tiny flowers. Catherine, I can't accept this. It's too precious. Please take it, Catherine insisted. My grandmother always said that marriage was about two people choosing to build something beautiful together, no matter what challenges they faced. I think she would have liked your story. As Eleanor held the delicate handkerchief, she realized that Catherine was right. She and James weren't just getting married despite the challenges they faced. The morning of Eleanor and James's wedding dawned clear and bright, with a gentle spring breeze that carried the scent of blooming flowers through the open windows of the Whitmore house. Eleanor woke early, her heart fluttering with a mixture of excitement and nervousness that she had never experienced before. Mrs. Patterson appeared at her door with a tray of tea and toast. The big day is here, Miss Eleanor, she said with a warm smile. How are you feeling? Like I'm about to start the most important adventure of my life. Eleanor replied honestly. Over the past 2 weeks, the preparations for the wedding had transformed the Whitmore estate. Thomas had hired extra help to prepare the gardens and the house for the celebration. The ceremony would take place in the garden overlooking the valley, with the reception to follow in the large dining room that had been decorated with flowers from the estate's own gardens. Eleanor had chosen to have a simple ceremony with just close friends and a few family acquaintances. She had been surprised by how many people had accepted their invitation, including several families from town who wanted to show their support for the match. Your dress is ready, Mrs. Patterson announced, opening the wardrobe to reveal a beautiful gown of cream-colored silk. Eleanor had insisted on something elegant but not too elaborate, and the local seamstress had created exactly what she had envisioned. As Eleanor got dressed, she thought about how different this wedding day was from the one she had imagined as a young girl. Back then, she had dreamed of a large church ceremony with hundreds of guests and a dress that cost more than most people made in a year. Now she was having a small garden wedding with a dress she could actually afford, and she was happier than she had ever imagined possible. Betty knocked on the door and entered with a small bouquet of flowers. "Master James picked these from the garden this morning," she said with a grin. "He wanted you to carry something that came from the place where you'll build your life together." Eleanor took the bouquet of white roses in baby's breath, touched by James's thoughtfulness. These weren't expensive flowers ordered from the city. They were flowers that James had grown and tended himself, making them more precious than anything money could buy. A gentle knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Eleanor?" came Thomas's voice. "May I come in?" "Of course," Eleanor called, and Thomas entered, looking distinguished in his best suit. "You look beautiful, my dear," he said, his eyes misting slightly. "James is a very lucky man." "I'm the lucky one," Eleanor replied. "Mr. Whitmore. Thomas. I want you to know how grateful I am for everything you've done for me. You saved my life that day at the auction, but you've given me so much more than that. You've given me a family and a future I never thought I could have." Thomas stepped forward and took her hands gently. "Eleanor, you've given us just as much. You brought my son back to life and reminded this house what happiness feels like. I couldn't be prouder to call you my daughter." Eleanor felt tears threatening to ruin her careful preparations, but they were tears of joy rather than sadness. "Are you ready?" Thomas asked, offering her his arm. "Your future husband is waiting for you in the garden, and I believe he's getting quite nervous." Eleanor laughed and took Thomas's arm. "I'm ready." As they made their way through the house and out into the garden, Eleanor could hear the soft sound of music. James had arranged for a small group of musicians from town to play during the ceremony, and their gentle melodies floated through the air. The garden had been transformed into something magical. Chairs were arranged in neat rows facing a simple arch covered with climbing roses. White ribbons fluttered from the trees, and the late afternoon sun cast everything in golden light. But Eleanor only had eyes for James, who was waiting for her at the front of the gathering. He looked handsome in his dark suit, sitting straight, and proud in his wheeled chair beside the minister. When he saw her approaching, his face lit up with a smile so bright it took Eleanor's breath away. As Thomas walked her down the aisle between their gathered friends and family, Eleanor felt a sense of completion she had never experienced before. This wasn't just a wedding, it was the beginning of the life she was meant to live. When they reached the front, Thomas placed Eleanor's hand in James's and stepped back. The minister, a kind elderly man who had known the Whitmore family for years, began the ceremony with words about love, commitment, and the courage it takes to build a life together. "Marriage," he said, "is not just about two people falling in love. It's about two people choosing to keep loving each other every day, through good times and difficult ones, through changes and challenges and all the surprises that life brings." Eleanor looked into James's eyes as the minister spoke, and she knew that whatever challenges they faced in the future, they would face them together. When it came time for their vows, James spoke first. "Eleanor," he said, his voice strong and clear, "6 months ago I thought my life was over. I had given up on happiness, on purpose, on the future. Then you came into my life and reminded me that courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about choosing to keep going even when you are afraid. You've made me a better man, and I promise to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of your love." Eleanor felt tears slipping down her cheeks as she began her own vows. "James, you've taught me that real love isn't about being rescued by someone else. It's about two people choosing to build something beautiful together. You've shown me that strength comes in many forms, and that the greatest strength of all is the willingness to be vulnerable enough to love someone completely. I promise to stand by your side through whatever comes, to believe in our dreams even when they seem impossible, and to love you more every day for the rest of my life." The minister pronounced them husband and wife, and when James leaned forward to kiss his new bride, the small gathering erupted in applause and cheers. Eleanor felt like her heart might burst with happiness. The reception that followed was intimate and joyful. Thomas had arranged for a wonderful meal featuring all of Eleanor's favorite foods. And there were toasts and laughter and music that lasted well into the evening. As the sun began to set, Eleanor found herself standing on the terrace overlooking the gardens, still wearing her wedding dress, but with her shoes kicked off and her hair coming loose from its careful arrangement. James wheeled up beside her, looking relaxed and happy. "How does it feel to be Mrs. James Whitmore?" he asked. "It feels like coming home," Eleanor replied, leaning down to kiss him softly. "I have something for you," James said, pulling a small wrapped package from his jacket pocket, "a wedding gift." Eleanor opened the package to find a key made of polished brass. "What does it unlock?" she asked. "Your new workshop," James said with a grin. "I had the old storage building cleaned out and fitted with windows and shelves. I thought you might like a place to pursue your own interests and projects." Eleanor stared at the key, overwhelmed by James's thoughtfulness. In all her dreams of marriage, she had never imagined having a husband who would encourage her to develop her own talents and interests. "James, this is wonderful," she said. "But I don't even know what I would do with a workshop." "We'll figure it out together," James replied. "Maybe you'll want to learn woodworking or painting, or maybe you'll develop a talent for growing things. The point is that you'll have space to discover what makes you happy." As Eleanor held the key to her future workshop, she realized that this was what made their marriage special. It wasn't just about two people promising to love each other. It was about two people committed to helping each other become the best versions of themselves. "I have something for you too," Eleanor said, reaching into her bouquet and pulling out a folded piece of paper. "I wrote down all the reasons I love you, but I ran out of paper." James unfolded the paper to find a long list written in Eleanor's careful handwriting. As he read through it, his smile grew wider and wider. "You love me because I make you laugh. When you're trying to be serious," he read aloud with a chuckle, "among many other reasons," Eleanor confirmed. "And because I let you win at chess even though we both know you're better at it than I am." "That one might not be entirely accurate," Eleanor admitted with a laugh. As the evening progressed and their guests began to head home, Eleanor and James found themselves alone in the garden where they had spent so many evenings talking and dreaming about their future. "Do you ever think about that day at the auction?" James asked as they sat together under the stars. "Sometimes," Eleanor replied. "It seems like a lifetime ago." "I'm grateful for it," James said, surprising her. "Grateful? If your father hadn't gotten into debt, and if you hadn't ended up on that auction block, and if my father hadn't been moved to help you, we never would have met. All of those terrible things led to the best thing that ever happened to me." Eleanor considered this. It was true that the worst day of her life had ultimately led to the best day of her life. "I suppose that's one way to look at it," she said. "It's the only way to look at it," James said firmly. "Our love story didn't begin with a fairy tale meeting at a ball or a chance encounter in a bookshop. It began with both of us being broken and finding a way to heal together." Eleanor smiled and leaned against her husband's shoulder. "I like our love story better than any fairy tale.